But I wanted to go over a few things that he said in his interview with me on Monday about Israel that I tried to push back on, but you're more equipped to do so. So I'll just play some of this and you can comment on it.
I'm against the judicial reform. Israel has probably, not probably, but Israel has the best judiciary in the world. It's better than ours. It is more humane. It is the only
better than ours. There's no constitution in Israel.
Okay. Oh, say go ahead. So what you want?
Israel has no constitution, but it does have a series of basic laws, and one of those laws defines Israel as a Jewish state, which would be sort of like the Supreme Court defining the U.S. as a white Christian nation. But let's go on. And I don't know if there's any way to speed up his comments, but we could get through a lot more if it was like 1.5 speed.
Unfortunately.
That outright forbids torture, even in the ticking time bomb scenarios. The only judiciary that's actually specifically addressed the ticking bomb scenario. So you have a terrorist who you've caught, who knows there's a bomb that's going to kill tens of thousands of civilians. And the Israel judiciary has said, even in that case, you cannot torture him. No other judiciary in the world says that. The Israel judiciary has, there's...
So the ticking time bomb scenario, Israel has introduced and perfected the doctrine of preemptive military strikes, where if they think they simply drop 2,000-pound bombs on anyone they determine to be a militant. In the Gaza Strip, during military escalations, entire families have been killed, bombed in their homes simply because they belong to Hamas. This is why you see the destruction of so many homes in the Gaza Strip. And then, of course, Israel has practiced torture throughout its history. The first Intifada, there was the broken bones policy, where Yitzhak Rabin actually instructed his soldiers to break the bones of Palestinians who threw stones. There was the helicopter technique perfected by the Israeli Shin Bet in detention. Torture is used through isolation, psychological torture. I mean, it's still practiced by Israel, so I don't know what he's talking about there.
Okay.
I think 3 of the 12 Supreme Court justices are Palestinians. There are Palestinian judges all over, as there are legislatures, and it's guaranteed, full participation of Palestinians in the electoral process. There's 1.9 million Palestinians in Israel who vote. They elect legislatures.
Okay, can we stop there?
Yes, I'll stop there. Go ahead.
So he's saying Palestinians have full equal rights inside the state of Israel. First of all, I, as a Jew, have more rights than any Palestinian citizen of the state of Israel because of the the law of return, which allows me, just simply because I have a matrilineal Jewish line, I can declare myself an Israeli citizen. And therefore, I have 2 countries, even though I have no connection to Israel whatsoever, except that I've visited there. There are 100,000 Palestinian citizens of Israel who are internally displaced because of the absentee property law, which seized their property in 1948 and gave it to Jews. The Israeli Lands Administration, or Israeli Lands Law, hands land to the Jewish National Fund, which exclusively gives land to Jews, which makes it virtually impossible for Palestinians to own land. Then there's the Citizenship and Entry Law, which prevents Palestinian citizens of Israel from marrying Palestinians from the West Bank or Gaza. Why? Because the state of Israel, as a Jewish state, is afraid that they'll have too many babies and that they won't be Jewish babies, and Israel needs to define itself as a Jewish state according to its so-called Jewish demographic majority. That's why it practices ethnic cleansing, like the kind I witnessed in the Negev, of Palestinian citizens who are Bedouin. Their village of Al-Araqib has been demolished over 70 times because it's because it's defined as an unauthorized construction. The Bedouin there are not allowed to build except in these reservation-style towns because, once again, the land is for the Jews. But let's go back to the citizenship law. It limits who Palestinian citizens of Israel can marry. Imagine an American law that limited who Americans could marry according to nationality because of demographics. That's not a democracy. So we can move on.
Okay.
Are represented in the judiciary. and they can practice freedom of religion. It's the only place in the Mideast where they guarantee protection for gays. There was a pride parade 2 weeks ago in Israel with 150,000 people in Israel, in Tel Aviv and in Jerusalem at the same time.
Now, when he was saying that, in my head, I was thinking like, this is the equivalent of Andrew Jackson, doing the Trail of Tears and then doing a gay parade at the same time, right? Isn't that? I mean, that's what I was thinking.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like if he had the gayest Trail of Tears ever. And these are gay soldiers who carry out drone strikes against Palestinians, who enforce the occupation. But they, so what he's doing there is pink washing. He's justifying occupation and apartheid on the basis of a gay parade in Tel Aviv, which, by the way, at least a plurality of Jewish Israelis consider satanic. And gay parades have been attacked in Jerusalem. But the point is, he's doing
pink washing. I hadn't heard that term before, but that's what that is.
It's sick because it's basically saying if you have a gay parade, you can treat the indigenous, backwards, retrograde natives as bomb them to rubble and treat them like fifth-class citizens.
And that's the thing, right? Like, I've covered so many stories on Israel and Palestine where Israel just wipes out neighborhoods. This idea, I've seen the video, I saw it, and this is what we had the falling out with Dave Rubin over, right? I mean, political falling out with Dave Rubin. I didn't have a personal falling out with him. We had a political falling out because he was for them bombing schools. Yeah. And he was like that. I'm like, they're literally bombing schools. I'm covering this. I know this is happening. And, I remember on even Meet the Press when David Gregory used to host it, there was that guy literally crying because they were bombing schools and they wouldn't stop. They were calling the military leaders, please don't bomb this school. Please. And then they did it anyway.
Yeah, they kept bombing these UN schools that were used to house people in the Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip is one of the most densely populated places on earth. And in 2014, when Israel was bombing the areas along the buffer zone, which are heavily populated, to ruins with 155-pound U.S. supplied howitzers, with 2,000-pound, 500-pound bombs. I went to these areas and just found shrapnel everywhere among the destroyed homes. People had to evacuate, so they went to UN schools, and then the UN schools were getting bombed left and right, and there were casualties. But, Bobby goes on to say that Israel only attacks military targets. That's not what Israel says. That's not what the general staff of Israel's military high command says. The former chief of staff of the Israeli military, Gadi Eisenkot, conceived a doctrine called the Dahiyya Doctrine. It's named after a southern Beirut majority Shia neighborhood that Israel destroyed, leveled to the ground in 2006 in its failed war against Lebanon, and specifically against Hezbollah. And the point of this doctrine is that you don't attack the military targets, you attack the popular base of the political force that you aim to destroy in hopes of demoralizing that population so that they will turn against their leadership. It's sort of like sanctions, but with bombs. And that's why you see Israel destroying during military escalations entire neighborhoods. It's according to that doctrine. The Israeli military, and if you're watching this now, just Google mowing the lawn Israel or mowing the lawn Gaza. Israeli military commanders call it mowing the lawn, something they have to do every few years against the population of Gaza or southern Lebanon, cutting the grass down to size so that they don't grow up and resist Israel.
Okay.
And they were hanging gays from cherry pickers.
So he's doing
Wait a minute.
He's doing the in Iran at the same time in Iran as they were having gay pride parades in Israel. They were hanging them in Iran. Go ahead.
It's like every few seconds we have to stop it.
I know, it's not good.
Okay, not to say Iran is some like progressive LGBTQ IAA 2SS plus paradise. Okay, I'm not saying that, but he's saying at the same time Iran was hanging gays, like masses of gays from cherry pickers. Maybe I missed the news, but this seems kind of like a exaggeration.
again, the reason why there's a theocratic government in Iran is because the same CIA that killed his father and his uncle overthrew their democratically elected government so we could steal their oil.
And he knows that.
And that's why the people of Iran have to live with that government. That's why. Okay.
Place where women have full rights. It's the only place where Palestinians can legally complain about their government with no fear of reprisals. Anywhere else, including the West Bank, if you complain about extremely corrupt governments in the West Bank or Gaza, you.
So when he says that there's extremely corrupt governments in Gaza, that's like saying that the prison gang is corrupt, because Gaza is a prison, and you can't not let people travel. You can't refuse people the right of travel, and that makes that a prison. And then you can't bomb a prison, no matter how bad the people in the prison are. You can't bomb a prison. Okay, which I said that, but he talked over me when I was saying that. But so now go ahead. What would you like to say, Max?
Well, exactly. I mean, he's using the repression, such as it is, of the Hamas authorities in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority, which is funded by the United States in the West Bank, to justify occupation, while denying that the occupation even exists. But right now, as we speak, there are protests in the Gaza Strip. Yeah. People are demanding better services from the Hamas ruling government. They're not being shot and killed in the streets there. Not everyone dies if they protest or criticize their government. However, they are repressive governments, and they're repressive by design, particularly the Palestinian Authority, which was designed by the United States according to the Oslo Accords and is funded to be repressive so that it arrests Palestinians and prevents them from resisting their occupier, their dispossessor. So and then if you, as a Palestinian, attempt to resist the occupation in the West Bank, you will be shot by Israel. I've seen it in villages like Nabi Salah, in villages like Belin or Nalin, which are small farming villages that exist along the line of the apartheid wall. These farmers and families who've been cut off from their own land by a wall went out and protested the military without weapons, and they were shot by rubber-coated steel bullets, tear gas, skunk water. I've watched their homes sprayed with this toxic skunk water, and some of them have been killed with live fire, and at night the Israeli military would come in and arrest them in their beds, including arresting small children in their beds of these villages. So Israel is the ultimate repressive force, and it essentially controls what happens with the Palestinian Authority. The reason people voted for Hamas in the first place was because they were willing to resist, and they were seen as less corrupt than the Palestinian Authority.
Okay. Risk your life, and you'll face torture and death. So, the judiciary in Israel is unique in the world. It's also said you can't pressure people putting pressure on their family. You can't pressure terrorists in that way at all.
I have a feeling that happens all the time, though. I mean, again,
but you can go to jail for it.
But I'm not. You're right. But I'm not. I'm not an expert.
And you can sue people.
Okay. So, Max, was I correct that they pressure people? That what he said that doesn't happens all the time. Was I correct or wrong?
What was he saying doesn't happen?
That the judiciary in Israel says you can't pressure people. You can't pressure the families of terrorists and stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. If you're deemed a quote unquote terrorist, which means if you engage in armed activity in the West Bank against, for example, the Israeli military or settlers, Israel will demolish your family's home. They do it again and again. They blow up homes. They do it in occupied East Jerusalem and Silwan as well. There's no doubt about that. Israel doesn't deny that they do that. It's textbook collective punishment. And then they also destroy communities and families by recruiting collaborators using, trying to blackmail them and pressure them in order to collaborate with the Israeli authorities. If they find out, for example, that they're,
so that would be like if somebody committed a terrorist act, like Timothy McVeigh, let's just say the worst terrorist in American history. And that would be like if we went to his house and then crushed his house where his parents and brothers and sisters lived. That's what they do in Israel. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, and this isn't people who've been blowing up federal
No,
buildings.
I know. That's why I'm using an gross example. We wouldn't even do that in the United States. We wouldn't go to Timothy McVeigh's house and crush it with his family inside of it because he did something so terrific. But you're saying they do that all the time, and that's their policy, actually.
Yeah, there's another film I would recommend to Robert Kennedy Jr. called Arna's Children. It's about a woman named Arna Meyer, who's a Jewish woman who had a mixed Jewish-Palestinian son. She died of cancer after starting a theater in Jenin, an occupied Palestinian city with a refugee camp filled with people who have been dispossessed by Israel. And she started a theater for the youth there. And her son, Giuliano, took over that theater after she died of cancer. And during the Second Intifada, the theater was destroyed by Israeli bulldozers along with much of the refugee camp. And the youth, many of the youth who are in the theater programs, and the theater is still active, by the way, they participated in armed activity. They battled Israeli soldiers in the streets of Jenin. And it profiles some of these youth, and they explain why they picked up the gun. And many of them had already had their homes demolished by Israel. That's why they did it. Imagine just having your family home destroyed by a foreign occupying army. How would you feel?
Right. I know. Okay, let's see what else.
Every year. Now we give $2.3 billion to Egypt, which, has no human rights. And we give $1 billion to Jordan, which has no human rights. And we give $800 million a year to the Palestinian Authority, which uses that money to pay bounties to Palestinians who kill Jews, not government officials.
Now, tell me, that hasn't happened for 15 years, right?
Well, it's just a straight up lie in the first place. The Palestinian Authority coordinates directly with the Israeli military. Do you think the Israeli military would coordinate with them, or Congress would fund them if that was happening? And he goes on to say it's any Jew anywhere in the world. I mean, I've lived for months under the Palestinian Authority in places like Ramallah. No one cared if I was a Jew. No one's running around hunting Jews anywhere and getting money from the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority is there to arrest Palestinians and provide a pseudo government for Palestinians so Israel doesn't have to take on the responsibilities of occupation. He's just completely making that up out of whole cloth. And he doesn't seem to understand that Egypt gets that $2.5 billion or so from the U.S. as part of the Camp David deal, so that it represses its own citizens who would like to resist Israel and would like to defend Palestinians from Israeli violence. Same with Jordan, which has a majority of Palestinian citizens. Those countries are paid by the U.S. to be repressive to their own citizens. The Palestinian Authority, I mean, he's just making that up. And it's a slander of Palestinians to say that.
Jewish civilians. So if you go to Israel and if you kill a Jew anywhere in the world and you're a Palestinian,
anywhere in the world,
the Palestinian Authority will pay you money for that.
And that's just a flat out lie, Max?
It's a flat out, complete, and total lie.
Well, I can't wait to hear him answer that to you. What then?
So he's saying U.S. taxpayer money is used to pay bounties to kill Jews anywhere in the world. I mean, that's just bonkers.
Because we fund, okay.
And they will.
I don't know enough to push back on this. Jesus Christ.
So I know. I think there's this narrative, and particularly on the liberal left, that says that portrays Israel as a kind of occupying nation.
I can't even to say kind of. We don't.
He's saying it's
kind of. It's 100%. What are you talking about? They don't have the freedom of movement. So that's the thing, right? So I wish I would have said this, that the people who are in control of the situation, they have the greater moral responsibility. The people who they're controlling don't. The people are the prison guards have a greater moral responsibility. The warden has a greater moral responsibility to take care of those people than those people do at all. So that's the part I think he's totally missing, because he keeps pretending that it's not an occupied state. It 100% is. And
it's just a left-wing narrative.
That's not a left-wing narrative. That's every human rights organization in the world.
It's the United Nations Security Council Resolution 242.
And he would say that's because they're anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
On a Palestinian land, and the whole thing is a lie from start to bottom. And let me just tell you a little bit about the history.
Okay, here we go.
Israel is a kind of an occupying nation sitting on a Palestinian land, and the whole thing is a lie from start to bottom. And let me just tell you a little bit about the history. Israel and Jordan were part of what was called the British Mandate when the Ottoman Empire, in 1922, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I. We went to war. The Palestinians were on the side of the Ottoman Empire against the Allies. The Jews were on our side. There were more Jews in Palestine at that time.
Wait a minute, stop. First of all, that's totally false that there were more Jews inside Palestine at that time than there were Arabs. That's why there was the Arab Revolt, because the Peel Commission was giving the Jewish population, or allotting the Jewish population, ports and better land and more land, while they were in the minority. It's why Israel couldn't accept Resolution 181 and had to initiate ethnic cleansing, because the populations were so similar in the territory that was partitioned for a future Israel. And then it wouldn't have been a Jewish state, and the the Palestinian population could have potentially elected a Palestinian prime minister. So they had to forcibly eject them. Then he completely leaves out the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was a straightforward colonial plan to give the Palestine to the British Mandate. This was in 1916. And he seems to be justifying the occupation on the basis that Palestinians fought on the wrong side in World War I, on the side of the Ottomans, when they didn't have a choice to live under the Ottoman Empire or not. And who says that, we were the good guys in World War I? World War I was a disaster that led to the Versailles Agreement, which created humiliated Germany and gave rise to Hitler. So the whole history is completely jumbled here and convoluted. But the biggest distortion is that there were more Jews than Arabs at that point, and that they were given a raw deal when they were a settler colonial population that was infringing on the territory of the Palestinians, who had been there for centuries and were being moved in under the auspices of a colonial mandate.
Were Palestinians. But at the end, the Ottoman Empire disappears. And so there's a lot of land that is part of the Ottoman Empire. And the question is, what do you do with that land? Woodrow Wilson and the League of Nations said, what we're going to do is we're going to give it to whoever lives there. Whoever lives on that land.
No, it was Sykes-Picot. It wasn't some international agreement.
Say it again.
It was Sykes-Picot. I mean, these were colonial great game players, and it was like a secret agreement. There was nothing democratic about it. The Palestinians were completely shafted.
Okay.
Their own country. They took Palestine, and they said, there's half the people, a little over half are Jews, a little under half are Arabs. So we're going to cut it in two, and we're going to give half, part of the Jews, part of the Arabs. But there was so much anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic bigotry at that time that they gave 4/5 of it to the Arabs and 1/5 to the Jews, just a tiny sliver 9 miles across to the Jews, tiny, tiny little piece of land with their sacred sites that were not Muslim sacred sites ever. So, that's how that would.
I mean, he's just, I don't even know where he's getting that from, but he's basically saying that a Jewish state, an exclusive Jewish state, should have been created out of a settler colonial population that was in the minority over the whole of Mandate Palestine after World War I. This is just next level. But let's move on.
The original distribution. And then in the 48 war, when Israel got its statehood, they were immediately attacked by by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, all the surrounding countries, and Lebanon, and miraculously beat them off. The Palestinians were on the side of the attackers.
All right, wait, stop here. Okay, the Palestinians were on the side of the attackers. The Palestinians were being ethnically cleansed. 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly removed from their homes, their towns, their even cities like Jaffa, which has now been absorbed into the Tel Aviv municipality. The entire neighborhood of Manshia was destroyed in this process of ethnic cleansing that actually began in 1947. Over 200 Palestinian villages had already been destroyed by the time Israel signed its so-called Declaration of Independence in 1948. The Palestinians were fighting against their own dispossession with a pathetic army that was poorly armed, and there was not some miraculous Israeli victory. It was kind of a phony war, and the victory was foretold. The Egyptian monarchy barely resisted. The Egyptian force consisted mainly of volunteers associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. There were not that many of them. The only real force capable of challenging the Israeli military, the Haganah and the Zionist militias, which were heavily armed and were, even getting submachine guns through Czechoslovakia, was the Jordanian Royal Legion, which had been trained by a British military officer, Pasha Glub, and they cut a secret agreement. King Abdullah, the Jordanian king, cut a secret agreement with David Ben-Gurion, the leader of the Zionist movement, who became Israel's first prime minister, to have the Jordanian Royal Legion stop at the Latrun Gap around Jerusalem. They would get East Jerusalem, and then Israel would be allowed to be created as this Jewish state. And so they never actually defended the Palestinian population. And King Abdullah was later assassinated by a Palestinian for selling them out. Who's King Abdullah? He's from the Hashemites. They were kicked out of Iraq by the Iraqi people because they were they were imposed by the British colonial rulers. And then they were just given this little territory by the British. So, RFK doesn't know any of this history, but Israel's victory in 1948 wasn't miraculous. It was a titanic crime. There were Palestinians from Lida Ramle were sent on a kind of trail of tears called a death march. It was like they called the Lida Death March after they were massacred under the watch of Yitzhak Rabin. And in his own memoir, Rabin said that he was asked by Ben-Gurion what to do. Ben-Gurion asked him what to do with that population. He asked Ben-Gurion what to do with the Palestinians there, and Ben-Gurion went like this and waved his hand, get rid of them. Why did he wave his hand like that? He didn't want it put in print because the Nuremberg trials had just taken place, where Nazi war criminals were convicted of crimes against humanity, and he was worried that if he put it in print, this order to ethnically cleanse this population, he too would be convicted possibly of crimes against humanity. So he leaves out this entire history that defines Palestine. It's why there are over 5 million Palestinian refugees and millions more living in the Palestinian diaspora. He denies that history, and to me, that's the moral equivalent of Holocaust revisionism.
Okay.
In all of those countries, all the Jews were expelled. So all of those countries expelled every Jew in the country and took away something like 27 million square miles of land that were just taken away from them. And those Jews were all sent to Israel. Israel did not do that to the Jews, to the Palestinians.
Wait a minute, stop. While it is true that Jews were expelled or made to feel uncomfortable in Arab countries after the state of Israel, because because Zionism cast them as potential Zionist collaborators, the Zionist underground in Baghdad actually planted bombs in Jewish community centers. And this is detailed in books like The Gun and the Olive Branch. This is established history in order to compel Jews to leave those countries, because Israel would benefit from having more Jews in this demographic trench war that they're waging against Palestinians. Similarly, in Egypt, you have the Lavon affair, named for the then Israeli defense minister under David Ben-Gurion, Pinchas Lavon, where Zionist spies or Israeli spies were recruited from within the Egyptian Jewish community to plant bombs in public places in a plot to blame the communists and the Muslim Brotherhood for creating instability, in hopes that the British would then intervene and prevent Nasser from nationalizing the Suez Canal. This is well-established history. It's Israeli historians like Avi Schleim have written extensively about this. It was Ben-Gurion who conceived this plot. So what did it do in the mind of the Egyptian population? It made all Jews in Egypt seem suspect and connected to Israel, and that population had to leave. So today, there are like 20 Jews left in Egypt. So I see Zionism not just as this giant crime against Palestinians, but also against Arab Jews and against Jews around the world, because we are not necessarily Zionists, but anti-Semites, if they want to implicate us or attack us, can try to implicate us in Israel's crimes. And that's kind of what Bobby Kennedy's unfortunately doing here in pushing back against manufactured allegations of anti-Semitism against himself. He's trying to emphasize his support for Israel as if Jews and Israel are necessarily connected, or that we're all represented by this self-proclaimed occupying Jewish state thousands of miles away. I hope you understand what I'm saying there. Sorry for going so far down the rabbit hole. I'll try to keep it quicker.
Okay.
In Israel, it allowed them to stay. And then, it's been attacked.
Wait, sorry. I got to correct him there. He said that they allowed the Palestinians to stay in 1948. We just covered that. That is just denial of one of the most massive acts of ethnic cleansing in 20th century history. Okay, let's move on.
Attacked in 1967.
Okay, stop. He said that Israel was attacked in 1967. That's another falsehood. Israel attacked first. Nobody denies that. Even Michael Oren, the Israeli historian who wrote a propagandistic pro-Israel chronicle of 1967, acknowledges that Israel attacked first in 1967 in order to wipe out the Egyptian Air Force. Israel was also seeking to provoke that war in the Golan against Syria through various means, but it's just false to say they were attacked.
Okay.
In that land, it was attacked, and it took land from its attackers. The Palestinians, again, were on the losing side. But it took
you're on the losing side, so you deserve to be occupied. So how about the Native Americans? The Kennedy family has been advocates for Native American sovereignty in the U.S., so did they deserve it?
From the attackers, which is the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, and the Golan Heights. And then Israel said, look, we want to give it all back. But we're not going to give it back because you can attack us from those parts. We're not going to give it back unless you promise us peace. If you renounce violence against us, if you admit that we have a right to exist, we'll give it back. Egypt said yes. And Syria got the Golan Heights and Sinai, and they got it back.
Stop. That is, I can't even believe what he just said. He said Syria got the Golan Heights.
That's what he said.
That would be news to Syria,
right?
Israel. That would even be news to Donald Trump, who had an illegal settlement built in the occupied Golan Heights named after him, Trump Heights. The Golan Heights is still occupied by Israel. They never got the Golan Heights back. And the Sinai Peninsula, Egypt liberated its own territory where Israel was building settlements through military force in the 1973 war through a surprise attack. So it wasn't through renouncing violence that they got it back. It was through military force that the Camp David Accords came about in 1977. That's how Israel operates. So he's just completely making stuff up here. I can't even believe that he thinks that the Golan Heights was returned to Syria.
Okay. Even I knew that wasn't true. I don't know why it slipped past me.
Because there's so much. He's coming at you so fast.
That's what I said. There was just such an avalanche of stuff. I did not expect that. I thought we'd talk about, hey, Gaza's an open air prison, an apartheid state, right? What do you say to that? And he's going back to the Ottoman Empire and reliving the war. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't pay attention in school. And so here we go.
Oh, and today you have, the Palestinian Authority, and in Gaza, if you kill a Jew, you get a street named after you. The children are taught from kindergarten that killing Jews is an act of patriotism.
That's just slander. I mean, that's slander. He has no basis for saying that. Meanwhile, in Israeli kindergartens, they are presented with, they're dressed in military uniforms. They're encouraged to start preparing for the military that they all have to join at age 18.
So, all right. Wow.
Yeah. Can I say something really
yes,
quick?
Please do.
I hope
again
that,
this isn't, we're not trying to take down Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is get him to stop saying this shit. That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. I'm
trying to get him to stop saying this stuff. I don't know what his political calculation is to say this, but there's obviously one. But you can't win. Maybe you can win this way. Maybe I don't. I'm not a.
Well, unfortunately, most American voters just don't care about foreign policy, let alone Israel, Palestine. So he understands that,
Yeah.
And maybe he is doing it because of the
Jeremy Corbyn thing, where they see
the Jeremy Corbyn thing is one too, but also as well like his coverage. He knows that if he goes against the Israeli lobby, they can hurt him, with getting news coverage and whatnot.
Right.
And not the fact that he's already kind of blackballed anyways, but still, maybe he thinks that could be it down the road. But if he's watching today, I hope he does take this, because as well as I do, there's no way whatsoever that his communications director, there's no way that Dennis Kucinich, there's no way whatsoever they're going to be like, you can take this interview. They'll be like, do not take this interview. Do not do it. No way. But if he does take it, it's going to show that he has some pull on what he can do within his own campaign and that he's his own man. That's the thing that's going to really make him look good, because he said he would do it. There's no way that his communication directors will want him to go near Max Blumenthal.
Okay.
Whatsoever. So if he does take that interview, he's going to look like he's making his own choices,
And you got to take your lumps.
Yeah.
You got. This is part of it. You got to take your lumps. Just take them and move on with your campaign. But did you? All right. I'm going to play something else, Max.
85% of those countries, people in those countries when polled, believe that it's okay to kill civilian Jews, and that it's okay, and that Israel has no right to exist, and their purpose is to destroy Israel and to exterminate the Jewish people. Now, Israel.
Where did he get that poll from?
I don't know.
85% believe it's okay to kill Jews, and he constantly conflates all the world's Jews with Israelis, with Israelis, which is what I'm not saying he's an anti-Semite. I'm just calling out this flawed logic, which conflates Jews with Israelis, because anti-Semites do that in order to hold all Jews responsible for Israel's crimes. So it's very dangerous rhetoric that I don't think he understands. I don't think he understands the danger of it.
But
presenting everyone around Israel as just a genocidal terrorist, and he wants to be the peace candidate. So I guess there's no hope for any peace negotiations. He's just writing off negotiations there, and he's signing on to Israel's policy of permanent war with the entire region.
Very targets. So civilians do get killed, but for example, in Jenin, in the recent battle over Jenin is a bomb factory. It's terrorist bomb factory. But Israel, unlike Russia, which when they have areas like that in Chechnya, or the United States and Iraq.
Stop for a second.
We bomb the whole.
He keeps mispronouncing Chechnya like he's never heard.
I know
of it.
it was weird that he mispronounced Chechnya.
It's like how in his Shmuley event he referred to hijabs which Muslim women wear commonly, including in the United States, where he should be seeking their votes. He refers to them as habibs, which demonstrates like a complete lack of contact with Muslims or Arabs. And so here he refers to Jenin as a bomb factory. I mean, it's just sickening rhetoric that there are no people there. Anything Israel wants to do to this city filled with people, including thousands and thousands of refugees who've been dispossessed, who live in just miserable poverty that he can't even imagine, that they just whatever happens to them, they deserve because they're not civilians. And then I don't even think that Israel is alleging that Jenin is a bomb factory. The problem that Israel has with Jenin is that the Palestinian Authority, its occupation subcontractor, is unable to control the population there. They've started to form armed resistance militias, which are attacking Israeli occupation soldiers as well as settlers. And they actually put up pretty strong resistance to Israeli military incursions. So you have an occupied population resisting its occupier with arms. That's why Israel went in with 2,000 soldiers. And then he proceeds to tell more falsehoods from here.
Right. Because, we're not going to send troops in there who are going to die protecting people.
You're saying Israel does. I know I've covered stories where they bombed schools.
Well, but not
what are you
never,
talking about?
never deliberately.
Oh, yes.
Oh, in war.
So I don't know what else I could say to that. I don't know what else I could say. I've covered stories where they deliberately bombed schools. I know this. I've covered it. And he just says, no, not on purpose. And then he's going to say war happens, right? Bad things happen.
Listen,
yes, that's not true.
Yeah, it is. Israel,
of course
the
it's
idea,
true.
Listen, the IDF, Colonel Camp was one of the top military experts in the world.
I've covered these stories.
Well, I understand. And
like, I don't know what else I was supposed to say to him. I don't know. I've covered this story. That's just not true.
Yeah.
I don't know am I supposed to scream at him? I don't know what I'm supposed to say, but that's just not true.
Yeah. It's collateral damage, Jimmy. They don't want to do it. It just happens because they're, military's hiding out in these schools. And what are you going to do? It's collateral damage.
You can't bomb a goddamn prison, which is what they keep doing. Okay.
Maybe somebody, I'm saying it's a policy. Of course, in war, stuff happens. And you may.
So that's what he's saying. They
Stuff
bomb
happens.
schools because it's war and stuff happens. No, that's not what happened. So, I know this because I've covered these goddamn stories, and so
you showed them. They destroyed a hospital there. They ran bulldozers through the center of town. They ran tanks through the refugee camp.
Why are there refugee camps in the first effing place? Tell me, I should have said that. Yeah. Why are there refugee camps in the first place? What is that? Why are there refugee camps?
Well, he said they let the Palestinians stay, so that means there's no reason for there to be refugees. But, and then he says they didn't kill any civilians. Hundreds of people were wounded. Thousands had to evacuate. And while there were people killed by Israel who belong to these armed militias, which aren't allowed to resist their occupation, according to him, because there's no occupation. They just like to kill Jews. They're just doing it because they just want to run around and kill Jews everywhere.
Yeah.
There was also at least one boy who was unarmed who was killed. But why even bother nickel and diming this stuff? The real issue is that Robert F. Kennedy denies that Palestinians are occupied, and the only reason they do anything violent is that they're just anti-Semitic Nazis. So he's calling an entire population anti-Semitic. It's like nothing happened to them. Why are they so mad?
Okay.
For some reason, though. I don't want to even continue debunking all this. It's
okay. All right.
I just want to say a few more things, and that's all I have to say.
Okay.
Because it's like, where are we even at here? Like 8 minutes or something?
I know, it's too much. That's what I'm saying. There was such a wall coming at me. Like, holy cow. Go ahead.
Well,
it's all propaganda. That was all propaganda. It was like 15-year-old talking point propaganda stuff.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says that he's embracing his family's legacy here on Israel. First of all, Teddy Kennedy was wrong back when he ran against Jimmy Carter in '79. he supported Israeli settlement activity and supported everything that the Likudnik government of Menachem Begin wanted to do then in order to raise pro-Israel money. And Teddy Kennedy was heavily supported by AIPAC. He was one of AIPAC's favorite Democrats. So I don't see what there is to be proud of there. I think there's a lot to be proud of that Teddy Kennedy did. His convention speech was a great speech against inequality. His opposition to Bush's war in Iraq, the speech he gave in the Senate on America's gulags like Abu Ghraib was incredibly heroic. His stance on Israel is not something to be proud of. And I felt like it was tragic watching Robert Kennedy Jr. seated with a Cretan, across from a Cretan like Shmuley Boteach, this race-hustling former reality show fake rabbi, as he used the official version of his father's assassination by Sirhan to implicate all Palestinians, when I know Robert F. Kennedy Jr. doesn't believe the official version, that some mad Palestinian just shot his father because he signed a weapons deal or supported a weapons deal for Israel. He doesn't believe that. He's passionate about opposing the official version of that. So why would you let this clown just get up there and spout a version of history that's so personal to you that isn't even true? I have questions about that. And I mean, then we have JFK's own problems with Israel, warning about Israel getting a nuclear program, for example, calling for Jerusalem to be an international city. JFK was not the staunch ultra-Zionist. He was not anything like today's Democratic politicians. And then finally, one of the proudest legacies of the Kennedy family is supporting the civil rights movement. And one of the things that was always at the center of their messaging, whether it was JFK or RFK Sr., was that justice delayed is justice denied. And when justice is denied, that's when violence enters. And that if Black Americans were going to be denied their civil rights and their basic rights, they would have nowhere to turn than to more radical leadership that was urging violence, urging the organization of kind of like armed self-defense militias against racist white cops. They always understood that. So why are Palestinians different when they've been denied not only civil rights, but the most basic human rights that anyone could possibly have to even own land? They're denied every possible right. They're denied the right to have rights. So why wouldn't they turn to violence? So I really want to question where Robert Kennedy Jr. is embracing his family's legacy here. Is it the wrong part of that legacy or the right part? Because I think there's a right part that he can embrace that will allow him to unite Americans, including Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, Muslim Americans, but the growing base of Americans who understand that what Israel's doing is wrong, and to give Palestinians hope that someone is cutting against the consensus of the Beltway duopoly, the uniparty on this issue, that someone isn't in the tank for AIPAC or the Adelson family. And so I don't know if he still has that opportunity here. He's gone really far down the rabbit hole. I fear that he might have fallen into a rat's nest with Shmuley and Morton Klein, but it's never too late to get out of there. If you were wrong about Russiagate and you're willing to admit it, then just step back, talk to some Palestinians, go see the wall, do what a version of RFK Sr.'s poverty tour in Appalachia, the RFK Jr. apartheid tour in Israel, Palestine, and talk to Israeli dissidents, just like you talk to American dissidents on COVID and other issues. Talk to Israeli Jewish dissidents who have gone to jail rather than go into an occupation army. I know some young people in Israel who have gone to jail over 5 times rather than participate in that army. Talk to them.
Okay, so we'll leave it there. That was great job, Max. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for coming on and pushing back against that. And I look forward to your interview with him, because now apparently he's agreed to do an interview with you. So that's fantastic. And I didn't want to mischaracterize it as a debate, but an interview. You guys are going to be debating Israel. That's what's going to be happening and the history of it. And so, but I think it's great that there'll be an interview, and you should be allowed to interview him, especially since he publicly called out your reporting and impugned it publicly. And the least you could do is then take an interview with that guy who's reporting you impugned, just like Peter Hotez did to him. And so that would be a catastrophic miscalculation if he ducked the interview with you. And I think that's why he's agreed to do it, because he realizes that. And this is going to be a tough issue for him. I have no idea why he goes so strong in denying reality about the Palestinian plight. Maybe it's because he fears what they did to Jeremy Corbyn. And that's certainly a legit fear. And so maybe he runs, a fantasy was, maybe he's running so strongly on the side of Israel. So, it's like Nixon going to China, so he's the guy he could go get it done then, because he's not seen as an enemy of Israel. But that's just a pipe dream. But anyway, he's not going to get out of the primary. So so people ask me about that. Like, why didn't you bring that up? I brought it up. This is our third interview with RFK Jr. And the last time I brought it up to him and I said, what are you doing? You're running inside a party that has super delegates. So there's you'd be better off running as a Republican. And he's like, no, he's a Democrat, and it's his party. And he even made the case that the Democratic Party was a little better than the Republican Party, which is that's a very tough case to make, because they're not the lesser of two evils, as we've explained here on the show many times, that the Democrats can do stuff that Republicans can't do. Like, they wouldn't have let John McCain take us from 2 wars to 7, kick 5.1 million families out of their house while he made sure the bankers kept their bonuses. But they would let the first black president do that. So again, they wouldn't let George Herbert Walker Bush pass NAFTA while he gutted welfare, exploded the prison population, and deregulated Wall Street and the telecommunications. But they would let Bill Clinton do it. But they wouldn't have let. It would have been a hell of a lot of. They didn't. They already didn't let. So this idea that the Democrats are the lesser of two evil is false. It's a false idea. They're the greater evil. Glenn Ford used to say that all the time at the Black Agenda Report, and I've heard Cornel West say that. So let me check that. I've heard Cornel West say that Barack Obama was the Santa Claus of Wall Street. I don't think he said that they're great. So I'll check that. But anything you'd like to say, Max, before we let you go?
Well, yeah, I'm not going to hold out any more hope for an interview or dialogue. If one happens, I'll try to keep it civil, and Robert Kennedy Jr. will get equal time. He'll get to say his piece. We're not going to jump down his throat. Can find an appropriate venue for it, but I'm not holding out any hope after all of what's happened. They know where to reach me. But I just want to thank you, Jimmy. I mean, you had access to a candidate that you sympathized with on COVID and Ukraine, and you used the access to drive home a principle that's important to us and to your audience. So you put principle above political access. And I think in doing so, you've opened up some space on the debate around Israel-Palestine that wasn't there before, just a little bit more space. So I really appreciate you doing that.
You're welcome. My pleasure. And I appreciate you coming on and setting the record straight. And it's such a tragedy that a guy who could stand up to the big pharma, military-industrial complex, the intelligence community, and his own party, for some reason can't find the words to do it around Israel-Palestine. It's a fatal flaw. Great men have great flaws. I think RFK Jr. is a great man for a guy who can stand up for the environment like he did, and the way he stood up for vaccine safety and all the slings and arrows he's taken over that, and COVID. Those are great acts. And now this is just as horrible as those are great. This stance on
and horrible in a sort of, in such a traditionally
horrible
American political mainstream way.
Yes,
it's not like weird horrible, like
right, right.
It's not even like entertaining horrible. It's just typical horrible.
Yes,
and so I always
I said, anyway, I sympathize with anybody who has to run and gets called an anti-Semite when they're obviously not. And I sympathize with anybody who has to negotiate this issue. Somebody asked me, hey, Max, because someone asked me, I was out with a couple of Jewish friends talking about this in my interview with RFK Jr., and my Jewish friends said, what's your solution? And I go, I don't know. Again, this isn't my issue. I don't know. Max, so what is your solution to the Israel-Palestine problem?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really into solutions when I have no power over.
Well, let's pretend you do.
Over any law, but I have no ability to make laws.
I know, but
I'm not running for office.
Okay, but if you had to write
what we could start with as a basis for a solution is something that I think Robert Kennedy Jr. would want for everyone in the United States under the U.S. Constitution, which is everyone enjoys equal rights under the law. And currently, Palestinians from the river to the sea do not enjoy that. And those living under occupation in Gaza and the West Bank have no rights. They literally have no rights. So this is about rights. It's not necessarily as much about land as it is about rights. And if they can't have rights, what must they do to get them if no U.S. president will allow them to negotiate for that? Because there's never been a peace plan put forward that was going to give those Palestinians the rights that they seek. So I believe the negotiation should be over the end of apartheid. You have an apartheid system that exists from the river to the sea that provides superior rights to people on an ethno-religious basis. If they were born Jewish, they necessarily have superior rights to Palestinians. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, why are they there? Most of them are refugees. Most of them. Like the overwhelming majority of them are refugees. And they can't leave and go into what is now Israel because they're not Jewish, simply because Israel needs to maintain a demographic majority of Jews in order to define itself as a Jewish state. If they allow them to go in and be free-range people, get out of their open-air prison, they are going to have children, and they're going to be there, and they are not Jewish. So you have a state that is an ethno-supremacist entity that denies rights to people who are of the wrong ethno-religious background. It's that simple. So I'm just talking about how do we get to the solution? We need to start talking about the issue of rights. And that seems like something that should be in Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s wheelhouse, but he's not thinking about that at all. Based on his comments, he's thinking about Palestinians as just like these genocidal anti-Semites who love to kill Jews for the sake of killing Jews.
That's not hyperbole. That's exactly, it is how he sounded. That's exactly, which was right. It is so beyond the pale. It's stunning to me, right? And it's especially for a guy, again, who's showed so much courage on other things. It's just a head scratcher.
Why can I, as an American Jew, have total unfettered access to Israel, become a citizen, get benefits from the state, while a Palestinian refugee whose grandfather is from Jerusalem cannot return, cannot go there, and will be shot if they attempt to try, as hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians were shot during the March of Return when they simply tried to walk into Israel. Why is that? It's unfair. And by the way, the New York Times office in Jerusalem is a former Palestinian home of an ethnically cleansed Palestinian family named the Karmi family. Thomas Friedman purchased it in the 1980s, in 1986, I believe, when he was correspondent. And Ghada Karmi, she's a very prominent Palestinian activist in London. Her father lived in that house. He was the broadcaster for BBC Arabic. She's not allowed to go back to her home that the New York Times uses as an office to spout bogus misinformation about what's happening on the ground. I mean, just think about that. So that's what we need to look. We need to look at through that lens. We need to look at the situation through the lens of rights to get to a solution. And that's how it needs to be explained to people on the other side too, especially those who are liberals in the US who believe in things like civil rights and, social justice.
Yeah.
And so the idea of, you touched on it, the idea of a one-state solution won't work because you're saying that the Israeli government is afraid that if they have a one-state solution, then the Palestinians will outnumber the Jewish people, and they can't have that. So that's why a one-state solution that will never work?
Right. I mean, you have a one-state reality right now where Israel controls all Palestinians through different mechanisms. For example, it controls them in Gaza by keeping them in a cage and bombing them whenever they get too feisty. It controls them in the West Bank through the pseudo-government of the Palestinian Authority, which is sort of a subcontractor of the occupation. And then it controls them in other areas of the West Bank just through raw military power, and it controls them inside Israel through this kind of two-tiered system of citizenship. And then it keeps all the Palestinian refugees out. But if it were to embrace a one state in which everyone had equal rights and could go vote for a new prime minister, it probably wouldn't be someone like Benjamin Netanyahu who'd be elected. It would probably be a Palestinian prime minister. And that would be the end of the so-called Jewish state.
And so that's why that'll never happen. Yeah. So the only solution is a two-state solution.
Well, a two-state solution is a disaster as well. I mean, we're seeing the fruits of a two-state solution plan, which is, what you see in the West Bank currently. Israel will never allow a real Palestinian state to exist. They've said that. Yitzhak Rabin, in his last speech before he was assassinated, said he wanted to create something that was less than a state, like a state but less than a state. Because a real state would have a vote at the UN. A real state would have a military. A real state would be able to control its own borders. Israel has never defined where its borders are, and it would have to do so. And in a real state would have political power that they can't allow. So that's why Israel has violated every aspect of the Oslo Accords while shaping the Oslo Accords so that it never had to negotiate borders or a real state. This is the situation they want, a perpetual one-state reality of apartheid. That's what it is. Yeah. And we don't know where it starts or where it ends.
Okay. Well, good luck on nailing down that interview with RFK Jr. He has said he has agreed to be interviewed by you. That's what he told me. Whether that means tomorrow or whether that means in 10 months, I don't know. But if it means tomorrow or next week, that's real. But if it means 10 months from now, that's not.
That's not real.
So fingers crossed. And
I'm exhausted anyway.
I'm exhausted. I'm also exhausted. I was exhausted on Monday. I'm even more exhausted today. But Monday was especially exhausting.
Let's get back to talking about vaccines and autism and the easy stuff.
Right? The easy stuff. Right.
Can we just talk about, COVID and bioweapons and just stop with this controversial, exhausting stuff about Jews and Arabs?
Softball's like gain of function.
Yeah.
And,
that's right. Softball's about natural immunity, herd immunity, contraction. Anyway, all right. Well, Max, thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Come see our live shows. We're going to be in Chicago, Rosemont, Las Vegas, Salt Lake City, New York City, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, Stamford, Toronto, Toledo, Detroit, St. Louis, and more. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for those tickets.